Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guest on this next interview. A senior economist at Russia's State Development Bank has warned that Moscow cannot win a prolonged economic war of attrition against Ukraine as long as Western support continues, and he has now reportedly lost his job. Now, the warning comes as Russia faces slowing growth, high interest rates, and mounting wartime costs. Joining us today on TVP World to assess whether time is really on Russia's side is Anders Åslund, Adjunct Professor at Georgetown University. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Thank you very much.
So can you tell us how significant is it that the warning about Russia losing an economic war of attrition actually came from a senior economist inside the Russian state system itself?
Yeah, I should say first that I know Andrei Klepac reasonably well from the 1990s. He was one of the young economists then, not very much on the opposition side, but rather on the government side. And he has been Deputy Minister of Economy in the early 2000s and then Chief Economist of the National Economic Bank. So he's very much part of the Putin establishment, one of the competent economists who has not been particularly liberal. I read his report in detail, and it's excellent. You would say that this is the best you could find from Western economic analysis of the Russian economy today. Very sound and sensible. And from the discussion afterwards, I was surprised to see that nobody objected to it. One of the discussants even said that this is a politically correct report. And the two amazing things in the conclusions is that he says that this means that we can't win a war of attrition, and that this leads to a social crisis like in 1917. These are the two amazing statements. The rest is very solid mainstream economic analysis.
Right. Now, Putin's strategy does rely very heavily on the assumption that Russia can outlast Ukraine and its Western supporters as well. Economically, is time still on Russia's side?
I don't think so. Or rather, we can't really say. What we are seeing right now is that both Ukraine and Russia are going for a full crash in the war. Ukraine is bombing oil refineries and this buries the Russian correspondence to Amazon on a big scale, and Russia is bombing Ukrainian shipping over the Black Sea now massively. So they are both pursuing a much worse warfare than they have done before. This has been a major escalation. So this is a question: who can break who fastest? And this is, of course, the big news in Andrei Klepac's report. We can't win a war of attrition, which Putin says, as you rightly pointed out.
All right, but even if Russia is losing this war of attrition, now traditionally authoritarian countries such as Russia don't really need that healthy of an economy to keep fighting as well. Are there any kind of economic pressure that could actually begin to constrain Russia's ability to wage the war?
Yes and no. Russia is now in a state of stagnation, while Ukraine has a tiny economic growth. The Ukrainian economic stability is greater because of all the Western support. Ukraine can get international financing, while Russia has no financing at all from the outside. But the essence is really, what are we fighting for? The Ukrainians know very well that they are fighting for the survival of nations. The Russians didn't think that the war concerned them until recently, and all of a sudden it turns out that it concerns them as well. And then they say, why does this happen? the internet now is full of videos saying, how can this happen to us? Why isn't there gas in the gas stations available for us?
Right, like I mentioned, Russia for a long time has actually insulated its civilians from the effects of the war, but it is starting to feel the pain now, especially with the strikes on an oil refinery infrastructure and even striking deep inside Moscow as well. Do you think the economic strain will push people to enact any sort of change within the Russian system itself, or does Putin still have such a strong grip within his own country that everyday average Russians' opinion don't really matter that much?
That's the critical question, and unfortunately that's what we can't know. That we don't really know what is the public sentiment. We do see that the public sentiment has turned much more negative, also in the official public opinion polls in Russia. But of course, people don't say that we want Putin to go. We also see that Putin is living in extreme paranoia. He moves between three residences where he has bunkers deep down, and he moves in armored trains between these three bunkers. We also see that a lot of top people have disappeared or died in or been sentenced to prison in the last 2 years. So something is happening at the top of Russia. Russians are no longer happy. They are concerned about the war, which they were not before. The Ukrainians don't change. They know that if we give up, we will die, or we have to flee. So we have no choice.
All right, like I mentioned, Russia is a little bit of an information black hole, so it's really hard to tell the actual effects, but we can see the winds of change starting to blow as well. Now, going back to some of the strikes that we were talking about earlier, including the warehouse fire at Wildberries, how important are Ukraine's increasingly frequent strike on Russian oil refinery and other economic infrastructure to this war of attrition equation?
Well, it is important. Actually, Andrei Klepach mentioned here that he thought that Russia's oil production would fall by nearly 20% because of lack of investment. We are seeing the assessments that Russia has lost 30% of its oil refinery capacity and now has to import refined oil products. So these things matter, and we are seeing lots of videos with lines to the gas stations that are several kilometers long. So something is happening. People are feeling it, and it also means that neither Russia nor Ukraine can now export over the Black Sea. So the economic impact is that this won't break neither Ukraine nor Russia. But the question is more political. Will people think that it's too much? The Ukrainians know that they have to survive. The Russians don't understand why they have this war.
All right, now many people have been calling Russia a gas station with an army, and economically speaking, if we look at the number of the Russian oil prices and the production, is there some tea leaves that we can read here to deduce Russia's capability to sustain current level of military spending by looking at how much they are, oil they're exporting and what's the global oil prices right now?
Not really, but we can see that they don't get extra resources. There was a discussion that Russia could benefit from the war in the Middle East, and that's one of the arguments that Andrei Klepach dismissed in this discussion, said that there is some benefit, but it's very limited. It is more serious that our three main clients for oil, China, India, and Turkey have reduced the purchases of oil from Russia because of Western sanctions that have an impact also on these countries that don't pursue the Western sanctions, and that Russia sells its oil very cheaply to these countries. So that issue is out. Russia is pretty much in the situation where it has been. It can have a budget deficit of only 2% of GDP. Right now, it is a budget deficit that is more than that. So therefore, for the last couple of months, Russia has been forced to cut its expenditure on the military because it doesn't have the money available. But it remains a war of attrition. It's not a collapse, but it's a stagnation. And from the beginning, Russia planned to reduce its military expenditure slightly this year, which it of course does not, but it can't increase it much. And actually, these are things that Kleppert said very interestingly in his report, that we might increase slightly, but not much.
Right, now, something that you mentioned earlier, that one of the big key distinction between Ukraine and Russia is how Ukraine can heavily rely on outside financing as opposed to Russia. Does that mean that the real economic contest is ultimately between Russian endurance and a Western political commitment?
Yes, but it's also that Ukraine will not give up. So Ukraine gets about $100 billion a year in external support each year. Russia gets nothing. Not even China gives Russia any funding, not even credits. So this means that Ukraine has a much stronger position in that financially, and also because Ukraine has a free economy. Ukraine has hundreds of startups in the military sector that are now producing all kinds of arms that Russia cannot respond against. But Ukraine has one big shortfall. That is the absence of Patriot missiles, which are the only arms that can take down ballistic missiles. And that is now Russia's main strength. And Russia uses that to hit civilians, the shipping on the Black Sea, and various private enterprises.
All right, of course, we'll have to see how this war of attrition goes. But in the meantime, thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it. And thanks for being with us on TVP World.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Cheers. And thank you for tuning into this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.